Ah, yes. Democracy. The purest form of governance. Power given to the people. Invented by the ancient Athenians. Sprung full-formed and perfect like Athena from the head of Zeus. We could surely do no better. Hello and welcome. I'm Zylla, and this is my Athenian. Today we're going to talk about the history of democracy, collectivism, and debunking the Greek miracle. But first, a note to those of you with anachronistically pristine white marble statuary in your profile pictures. My credentials are 3 degrees in the study of ancient Greece and Rome, including a coursework where I read in the original Greek many documents such as what we call the Athenian Constitution, the poetry of Solon, the history of Thucydides, and many more. If you simply feel like you must leave a comment, I implore you, please choose something other than just telling me to learn to read Greek or study harder. Be more creative. I am bored. Now then, on with the show. Where were we? Yes. Destroying the foundations of Western civilization. Something that I've mentioned in some of my previous videos is that the city-states, the polis, of ancient Greece were in no way united under a single government. What government any given city-state had was kind of a grab bag depending on the individual history. For instance, Sparta never had a democracy, not even when Athens did, and places like Syracuse and Chios arguably had a democracy long before Athens. Yes, I know that the core results tell you otherwise, but they're wrong. Seriously, even the Wikipedia page is more reliable on this subject. We're really only going to talk about ancient Athens today. Although, if you've got an interest in ancient Sparta, boy do I have a treat for you. Click the card above or find it in the link below. If you'd like me to dive into other polis or other topics like this, feel free to let me know in the comments. So, if ancient Athens didn't invent democracy, then why does it have that association with its origins? Well, let me tell you the story, as the historians Herodotus and Thucydides portray it. So, there was this tyrant, or tyrannos. It didn't have those connotations yet, but trust me, we'll get there. His name was Pisistratus, and he ruled Athens for quite a while. His power may or may not have involved a truly fabulous scandal with a woman named Phae dressing up as Athena herself and parading through the city. But anyway, Pisistratus ruled a long time. He was reasonably well liked, but when he grew old and died, his 2 sons took over, and they did not exactly measure up. They ran to excess, taking what they wanted and giving little back. The last straw for the nobles was about this love affair. The younger son, Hipparchus, took a liking to this boy named Harmodius, but Harmodius was already claimed as a lover by another aristocrat, Aristogeiton. So Harmodius rejected Hipparchus's advances, and in retaliation, Hipparchus publicly smeared Harmodius's younger sister as a prostitute. So the nobles all got together and hatched a plan to kill both Hipparchus and his tyrant brother Hippias. So messy. Tragically, while the young lovers did manage to kill Hipparchus, the elder brother, Hippias, survived and slew them for their crimes. But once Hippias was ousted too, a noble of their faction, Cleisthenes, established a democracy and erected a monument in memorial of the heroic duo, the Tyrannicides. Of course, it was Sparta that actually ousted Hippias, but none of that. That's a nice story, right? Heroic lovers killing a tyrant and then being slain themselves, but their successors come in and distribute power to the people, bringing freedom to Athens. Tied up in a pretty pink bow. Maybe around a bundle of sticks and an axe. But nothing's ever that simple. Thucydides gives us the important context, the place where all this comes from. This wasn't a sudden shift from an unending tyranny of rule by one to fully open and free democracy and collective rule. It was one in a long line of power battles among a set of elite members of society. As with many places in ancient Greece and beyond, but particularly common in the polis, power routinely shifted between an oligarchy, the rule of the powerful few, and sole rulership, tyranny, when one of those wealthy elites saw that he could get power by playing to the downtrodden masses. The rich men would rule in their oligopoly until someone, generally one of those ruling elite, figured out how to gain personal power by using the needs of the populace to become a demagogue. He would rule for a while, and then his heirs would pretty inevitably bungle it by failing to recognize what their father had been doing in balancing the needs of the people who kept him in charge against the power of the other wealthy elite. And things would shift back again. Nothing unusual about it. Until Cleisthenes. Cleisthenes, being an able and canny politician, spun that story of the Tyrannicides, along with perhaps a handy prophecy or two, into a patriotic compromise. Never again would the people be denied the vote, and never again would a charismatic ruler be solely in charge. Except, not really. Cleisthenes himself took on the role of archon, the term for the head of state, and he did it by doing the same thing that tyrants had done before him, placating the rich while pretending to uplift the poor. And that's where you have to bring in the larger body of evidence, both written and material, to really get at what underlies Athenian democracy. Because you can't just rely on the word of one single person, even such a luminary as Thucydides, to tell you the actual happenings of the past. You also have to look at things like the Athenian constitution, a probably collective, although often attributed to Aristotle, description of the history of Athenian governments from about the 7th century to the 4th century BCE. Or even tragedies like Aeschylus's Orestes, which, among other things, deals with the matter of whether or not maternal bloodlines count towards citizenship. Because once you have the votes, you've got to be careful who's allowed to have them. It's not like just anyone should be allowed to vote, of course. Why, then you'd have foreigners voting in Athenian elections. Maybe even women. You might as well free the slaves and have them vote. No, just as in the founding of these United States, only free, landowning citizen men of age were allowed to vote. Funny how when power changes hands, it always seems to fall out along similar lines. For a fun added twist, many government offices weren't voted in at all. They were drawn by lot. It's called sortition. Any eligible voter could put his name in to be chosen for any given office in this class. With between 30,000 and 60,000 eligible men in any given time, that meant that your odds could be as low as a 1 in 1,200 chance of being randomly picked for the office you wanted, though that was probably rare. If you were elected Archon, the head of state, your term was 1 year, and at the end of that year, you could never be Archon again, although you were moved on to an advisory council known as the Areopagos. The idea was to prevent any one person from building up a continued force of populist tyranny. But where there is ambition, people find a way. In any case, although democracy means power to the people, the founding Athenian fathers didn't exactly mean all of the people. And when the good old US of A was founded, you can bet that was taken into consideration. The United States and its founders were working from an understanding of the past that is admittedly still pretty popular. This idea that the ancient Greeks, particularly the Athenians, invented from whole cloth this wonderful society that had new concepts like democracy and medicine and education, and then the Romans adopted it and made it even better with their bureaucracy. This is known as the Greek miracle. This is, of course, nonsense. Even the smallest peek beyond the borders of this worldview will show you that the Greeks were a cultural backwater, centuries behind in all ways, from the Indian civilizations to the Mesopotamian civilizations to the Egyptian civilizations. But the Greek to Roman to English to American inheritance of exceptionalism, it's very much with us. In theory, the modern US democracy allows everyone over the age of 18 to vote. In practice, not so much. And for one thing, rich white people have continually invented new and exciting ways to deny black and poor people the vote. Everything from denying convicts their rights, to gerrymandering, to voter ID laws. And disabled people? There aren't even routinely large print ballots available, let alone something that a fully blind user could use, or somebody with a mobility challenge. But even if we smooth over these glaring exceptions, there are still issues. Like, for instance, what about children under the age of 18? They're people too, and our decisions will affect them pretty directly. At what point do we start taking their opinions seriously the way Quakers do? You know, I had a whole argument here, but I might save that for another video. Suffice it to say,
how dare you?
So now we come to it. Representation. For all of its many, many flaws, Athenian democracy was a direct democracy. One wealthy man, one vote. Not so in the US. Depending on where you live in the US, you might have disproportionate power over the national stage. Or none at all. Sorry, DC. And that's no accident. It's an artifact of our history, starting out as a bunch of independent colonies, each with its own identity and, more importantly, its own set of wealthy landowners fearing to have their power taken. At the Constitutional Convention, the smaller states refused to even join unless they were given a stranglehold on that power. Thus, 2 senators, no matter how big the state. It's a well-established fact that with current population sizes, a single vote in Wyoming is worth 68 in California. And, of course, there's the Electoral College, which in theory is based on population size, like the House, but in practice is skewed again in favor of those smaller states because it mirrors those 2 Senate seats per state. If 1 vote equaled 1 vote all across this country, we would never have had Trump in office. Or W either, for that matter, since he lost the popular vote to Al Gore in 2000. The difference matters. And on some level, I think we all kind of recognize the futility of our own vote. The politicians out on a hill in a land where there's taxes but no representation, they're the ones with the power, they're the ones who make the policy. They don't particularly do so with any recourse to us. It's easy to disengage, to say things like, oh, what effect could I possibly have on big issues? But it does not have to be so. In a direct democracy, every vote would count towards policy making. It was so in ancient Athens, to the degree that voting was there at all. Do you know what the word was in Athens for somebody who neglected their political duties? Idiotes. It comes from a root meaning private or inwards, like our word idiom, that means a saying or joke that only makes sense within its own milieu. It was an insult reserved for men so selfish or foolish that they didn't pay attention to the world around them and the running of their city. And it was an insult. Side note, that does not mean that you get to use the more obvious modern English derivation. Every word has a history, just like anything else, and this particular word's history includes a lot of ugly ableism. The Greek word was about something you chose to do. The modern English word has become about something that you cannot choose, and therefore is unacceptable. Got it? Good. And an idiotes is what we often become. Complacent in our powerlessness. We pay no heed to the movers and shakers up in the Capitol because the policies they make often have little relation to the words that they say. Our system is far from perfect. So too was it in Athens. All told, Athenian democracy lasted a couple of centuries. The US has existed in its current form at most generous count about 200 years. Realistically, more like 50. Things change. We need not be idioti forever. So, our current electoral system is kind of like a tourniquet, squeezing a bleeding limb dead in order to save the rest. But where minds and opinions change, movement follows. And you know what is a direct democracy? Local elections. Those are often ignored. And for another thing, just because some dead white male slavers chose Athens, and Rome, I'll probably make another video on that at some point, as their model for government, doesn't mean that we have to agree. There have always been other options out there. In the US, we need look no further than the land upon which we squat. Many indigenous nations across the Americas have had direct democracies or consensus-based anarchic systems. If you want to know more about the ways that European colonialism has warped our understanding of our own history, I highly recommend the book The Dawn of Everything by David Graeber and David Wengrow. Or, better still, seek out the living stories of indigenous activists like Autumn Peltier and Chia Bastida. We are not beholden to the views of rich Athenian men dead for over 2,000 years. There was nothing special about Athens. No Greek miracle. There was no sudden bursting forth of rationality and science and democracy. They were just people. They were just as flawed and arrogant and beautiful and brilliant as the rest of us. In the end, the idea of the great civilization is just as much a myth as the idea of the great man. So let's change the story. Keep learning, friends.